Hello and welcome to the Empower Couples podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is about the role of emotions in marriage and how to hold space better for each other.
Emotions, they come up, right? And not only in our sessions with couples, and that being a big source of what directs them towards communicating or having conflict, but what had us jot this down to cover this week was a conversation that we had coming back from a trip. So we had this incredible 3 nights, 4 days in Cabo, attending a wedding from a couple that we've really built a friendship with, and we were lucky enough to even do some preparing for marriage work with them. And it was just this great week, this beautiful resort, and we had a great time as a family. We got a little time, just the two of us at the wedding, and we come back, right? So all this good. We came back, and the night after we had unpacked a little bit, we had to have a little chat. You know, I sat down on the couch and I was like, hey, I need to clear something up. And of course I made sure, he's open to it. And we'll kind of reveal some of the conversation throughout the episode as it's relevant, but it was really about how we were each feeling. And even though nothing major happened during the trip, there were just little irritations that were building up that were having us start to be just a little bit more reactive to each other, even though people probably wouldn't even notice outside, we could feel it between each other. So we needed to clear it up. And I think a big part of why this episode is important is because if we, being Aaron and I, did not have the emotional awareness that we have developed, we could have easily just started a battle against each other, right? One of us could have just started a fight as a way to get this out rather than to communicate. So we're going to take you through this journey in this episode of really understanding what the role is of emotions in marriage. What does it mean to hold space? Why is that even important in a marriage? Common challenges that couples experience that blocks them from being able to hold space for each other. And then just some practical ways to focus on this in your relationship, even when you're busy, even when you have a lot going on, because it doesn't always have to be these long conversations.
And our friend had an event here this weekend, which is where I started to think about this particular way of forming the question. What is the role of emotions in marriage? And we see a lot of the same dynamics in couples. And so it seems we can make some generalizations from our own experience. And it does seem like there is a difference in how men and women perceive the role of emotions. Now, as I was contemplating on this over the last 24 hours, it would seem that for men, and maybe because we've largely gone into the workplace and corporate jobs and really that kind of focus, and even more on intelligence and intellect and all of that. And so the workplace really has no room for emotions. I think for whatever reason, it seems like that's not the place for this. It's not personal. You're here to do a job. You're here to do it effectively. And yes, they want people to communicate, but they want people just to communicate about what needs done, get it done, be efficient, and have the business be profitable. And so the workplace is not really a place that seems to have a role for emotions. Mm-hmm. Now, if you take all of that, then you get another segment. I'm still on men too, right? It's well, look, by no other general gender difference, from my own experience and talking to other men, there isn't really much of a role for emotions when we're growing up as young kids either. If I just start to move this backwards a little bit, well, I have friends and we play sports, and so emotions seem to be something that you express when you're hurt. Mm-hmm. So whether I'm playing in a sporting game and I fall down, or I get hit by a baseball, or I injure something, and if I go back further than that, it's I'm riding a scooter or a bike for the first time and I fall down and I scratch my knee. Well, look, there's nothing wrong here, but mostly we're really told that,
Be
hey,
tough.
emotions come up like when you're hurt, and it's part of who you're supposed to be as a boy and growing into an adult man is to not be so taken out by these emotions because they come up as a sadness or something to just express when you're hurt. So like
Mm-hmm.
just, get over it. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that as like a strong demand. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, yeah, you fell down
Be tough.
and
You got
just get
this.
up.
Mm-hmm.
No, just generally just get up and move on from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I take all that into consideration, then you get into a marriage and it's like, well, what is really the role of emotion? If you take your own childhood and you take working and the workplace, well, it's really only when you get hurt. Expressing it is going to cause a conflict, or even expressing it gets you misdirected from focusing on the task at hand,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you take all that, just the adolescence to the corporate world or your job, then there really isn't a place. There's no
Mm-hmm.
real role for emotion. So I can see where many men struggle with,
Mm.
is there supposed to be a role for emotions in
How do I
marriage?
handle them?
When my partner has some that come up, it's like, and then it goes
Mm-hmm.
obviously to how it's getting communicated, but let's just kind of leave that out. It's mostly like, well, there must be a problem over there, and it's probably going to be my fault, and we need to move past this so we can get refocused on the tasks at hand,
Yeah.
right? So, and there's not even any judgment in there. That's kind of how I see the role of emotions in marriage that comes from our life,
Mm. The
specifically
conditioning.
for men,
Mm-hmm.
and it leads to a lot of things. It leads to this perception that emotions are conflict, and then you can avoid them, and then it also, over years of marriage, I think for women causes a reduction in the closeness,
Mm-hmm.
and then men are kind of stuck. Like, well, what do you mean by closeness? We're around each other. We sit on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
We handle all these things together. Like, what do you mean you're not close?
Or I don't know what you want me to do. What do you want me to say to you being
Yeah,
upset?
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then so that's where you kind of end up. And that's to me where this podcast really comes in, is because it's like, well, there was no role for emotions like really any other time. And so I'm doing all the things I can. And yet you're telling me
Mm-hmm.
like you don't feel close or you need something more to feel fulfilled. It's like, well, where's this role of emotions then, right? And that's really my whole thought pattern of the last 24 hours of coming to this point.
So before we go further into our outline here, because you spoke from the male perspective, I just want to say, from a female perspective, and what Aaron was talking about around that conditioning, and especially when he mentioned like the workplace. I mean, women, of course, more and more, like he's really referring to past generations. I'd say the majority of couples that we work with are both working or they have a business. But there is a difference in past generations how men or boys and girls were conditioned, what they were told about this. And now it's shifting. I think more and more parents are starting to say, you know what, we want to raise emotionally intelligent boys and girls, right? And of course, there's going to be differences in personality and the way they express and, what affects them. So just speaking from the female perspective, this is again just my experience, is that I felt growing up, the influences that I saw most often let their emotions take over. So it wasn't about suppression. It wasn't about, oh, you just have to get over it. It was more so like I just saw more, just a lack of being able to self-reflect, self-regulate, and often it was like just outwardly expressed and in a reactive way, so it would spark conflicts. And so I had to learn on the other side of things, right? I had to learn that, okay, what's my role in first taking a moment to reflect and turn inward and see, why is this affecting me so much, before I just say something out loud. And so as you're listening, just think about your experience. How were you raised? What was your home environment like? Were emotions discussed? Were they welcomed? Were they expressed in a productive way? And just think about that, because it did influence you and affect you in many different ways. So let's go further into this. So what's the role of emotions then? Well, one of my favorite quotes, because I personally love reading about emotional intelligence, emotional resilience, and one of my favorite quotes is that emotions are data, not directives. And I refer to this often because to me, it's just one of the most clear ways to think about it. Emotions, for ourselves as individuals, is just something to give us information. Okay, I'm having some kind of an internal experience to external stimuli that are happening. Why? Let me take a moment. This is information. It's not a directive. It's not for me to feel it and then within a half a second to just act. That would be where you don't really have that self-control again. So that phrase to me is a reminder of I want to use these feelings, whether it's a text message that triggered me from a family member, or it's something you say to me, or it's something I observe. You know what? I don't need to say something right away. I don't need to act from this right away. I may feel that impulse, okay? But I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to ask myself some useful questions. Where is this coming from? Is this a pattern I feel is happening? Is there an underlying need that I haven't realized is there? Is there maybe a conversation I need to have with Aaron or any other person that I'm, being affected by? Just more of that moment, that inner conversation. Why is this affecting me? And is it actually something that my partner is doing, or do I need to just take a moment and really reflect first?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I know you like the alliteration of the phrase, data, not directive. Mm-hmm. Now I'm not going to say this to counter what you're saying. Mm-hmm. We got a couple of points to consider. How do you see the role of emotions in your relationship now, right? So you could see it as data, not directives, which I think is important for conflict. Now, for me, there is this other very important layer. Emotion and linking to your experience of life. This, to me, is what's so important about emotions. If you walk around life and you walk around your relationship either suppressing or being so reactive to these emotions, then, of course, they seem like they don't have a role. But emotions are what we're here to do, and that's to experience life and to experience love and respect and understanding and empathy and compassion,
joy,
and to go through hard things. And for me to be able to share that and feel like it's okay and it's accepted by you, and you show up in a way to support me in that experience. And then on the other side of it is to have our life start to unfold in ways that are miraculous, that do bring joy and connection and optimism and peace. That's what we're really here for. So the emotion part, if you walk around like there's no role, maybe for men or maybe for women in terms of like you're often reactive to it, so it feels very anxious or concerning or out of balance or unsettled, there is this place where emotion is really meant to be experienced, because that's what life is. If we walked around as if it was all just data or not happening, it would be very boring. It'd be a very mundane, very just gray existence. And that's really not what we're here for. So I want to move us to what is the role of emotions to be the juice of life, and not this thing that's associated with conflict or reactivity or upset. That there's a way in which we can maybe slow down, be more present, be more aware, and allow for the experiences. And maybe on a different podcast, it's like, well, you have to allow for both what we would label as positive or negative, and more just let the experience of life really hit us, right? So this is going more into Michael Singer, Untethered Soul, or Living Untethered. Those are his two books that really talk about this allowing for the emotion being like detached and not being personal, but allowing yourself to feel it. And then to your point, it's like, well, we can use that as data in the sense that it can be a guidance to give us some insight or intuition on where we should act, which direction we should act. If it's like a real threat, obviously we had to move in a direction for more safety or peace or harmony. And then also we don't want to just blaze past all the achievements and allow some celebrations sometimes. So to me, there's a a bigger picture there on what's the role of emotion, and to be able to do that with each other, which is going to transition us into holding space, is that it really does take something to be able to have the communication between the two of you in such a way that it's not shut down, it's not invalidated, it's not discounted, it's not then turned into a conflict. So there is this balance here of, all right, so I'm getting the sense that emotion is like the experience, the juice of life, but how do we share that together to really utilize it and not, deviate from a path?
I love that. Emotion as experience in life. I love that. And I also think that within a marriage, it's really about connection and intimacy, that intimacy doesn't just come from the good moments. It's not just date night. It's not just a vacation, which we loved our vacation and we danced at the wedding and it was fun. And that was, of course, a part of intimacy, but intimacy also is built from how we handle hard conversations, how we react or respond to each other when that we're upset by something, right? Or we bring up a need that's important within the relationship. So it's like intimacy is really depth and that full range of experience, right? Can we hold space, so we're going to get into what that means, what that looks like. Can we hold space and experience the range of emotions with each other, knowing that we want to experience the full range of intimacy and life together?
With allowing and accepting. So just take those two terms away. So why don't you tell us more, because the listeners might not be familiar with then holding space, right? Holding space is kind of an energy, emotional stance that you take that then does allow for emotions and the acceptance.
Yeah. And I'll give a definition, and then I'm going to bring you back to that moment where I had to bring up a conversation. Not had to. I chose to bring up a conversation after getting back, because it'll really, I think the story will tie it all together. So holding space, some definitions would be providing a safe space for each other to express your feelings without judgment. In a sense, it's really just allowing. It's not reacting. It's not fixing. It's not needing to change. It's not taking it personally. It's just, let me actually allow my partner to express and be heard and be seen. In a sense, the less you do, the better, right? And of course, it matters what you say after you're listening, but it really comes down to, can I just pause, listen, hear them out, not interrupt, and have them feel as though it's okay that they express their feelings, whether it's sadness or fear or anger, of course, within reason, right? We have to responsibly be sharing our feelings, and we'll talk about that, but it's just a safety. It's an allowing. It's a receptivity without judgment. And I know we can feel it when our partner is judging what we're saying or dismissing it or thinks it's unreasonable. Like, that doesn't create intimacy and safety. I mean, do you feel like you want to open up more to someone that is judging what you're feeling? No, right? So I'm saying that to you as the listener to really check yourself and think about, do you judge your partner's feelings? Do you think that they're ridiculous or you can't see their perspective? You got to really work on that, and of course we have to also do our work and really think about where our emotions come from, because sometimes they are something for us to work through, that may come from our past, but that's a whole other conversation. So any other definition you'd give for holding space besides that?
No, it's pretty good, because let's move into the more practical. It's how you listen, pretty much, right? It doesn't mean that you have to speak. I think holding space is a paying attention to, and sometimes an intuition on what should be shared as a response. I think that's an important part. So it has to do with the listening. And you've heard us say that hearing is not listening. Not only, right? Hearing is you're just audibly taking in the sound in your inner ear, which we do involuntarily. So listening does take a presence. It takes an intention, takes a focus. And then I think the holding space, because what is it? It's you standing in front of your partner. There's some body language. So, if you're really going to consider holding space, it's what does your body look like? Are you tense? Are your arms crossed? Are you have your shoulder to them? Are you facing them? Yeah. Are you rolling your eyes? Are you scoffing? Are you making a noise with your mouth? It's just, look, there's a lot. Your body does tell a story. So it has to do with then how you're listening. And the listening part is really because if someone's really listening, then you're going to be responding in a supportive way. If you're only hearing and not really listening, then you might be more reactive. You might miss some things. You might defend. You might justify. So the practice in holding space is really in being with the emotion being expressed. Maybe I would say being loose in your body. Don't make sure that your body is too tight. I would also say trying to have your breath be deep enough. Don't be too shallow. And then you're just really listening to them, because we've given that example of effective communication is that your listening is about them and not about the internal dialogue you have. So there's a shift there. Your listening is like, oh, what are they saying? What does it sound like they're upset by? What is this, the emotion that they're probably having? Maybe shift into some compassion, like, oh man, that probably is pretty hard. And so all of that then determines the key part of holding space for your partner is then, oh, what's my response?
Yes.
And look, there is no script for that. Like based on your listening, maybe you don't say anything and maybe you just hug them.
Or you say,
maybe
I hear you.
Yeah, maybe you just break the physical touch barrier. Maybe it's as simple as I hear you, that must be hard. Maybe it's a question. Man, that really sounds like a lot of weight on you. Are you wanting me just to hear you out more, or are you looking for some feedback, or are you just wanting to vent, right? So maybe it's a question. So there's a number of things, but I think you're getting the sense that you'll tell how well you're holding space because of your response comes off as supportive for what your partner needs in that moment.
Yes. Let me take you back to that moment that I mentioned. So we got home from the trip and we're unpacking, we're getting Sky ready for bed. Actually, yeah, we got her to bed and I was putting stuff away in our closet and I felt this emotion, right? Because again, it was like not these big things that happened on the trip. It was just like a few frustrations that built up for each of us. Like we each had a couple things and, we could have just avoided it and then maybe had an argument the next day because something else triggered it, right? Because that's what happens. Like if you don't address the underlying feelings, it will get provoked or triggered in some other way. It'll just surprise you and blindside you. But I was putting the things away and I'm thinking like, I'm asking myself, what is this data? Like, what is this frustration? Why is this bothering me? And it was really just a few things that had built up. And I was like, okay, what is a productive way to bring this up? Because I don't want to just, what my old self would have done before doing this work on myself is I would have just gone and kind of just started a fight. Started off with blame, negative statements, things like you always, you never, right? Yeah. Definitely not starting a productive conversation. So I'm like, okay, let me identify what is this coming from or where's this coming from? What are the needs? Why did that bother me so much? All right, what's a productive way to bring this up, right? So this is all self-reflection. You have to get good at that before you go and say it to your partner if you want to have productive conversations. So then I go downstairs and I'm like, hey, before we relax, because I know we want to, it's been a long travel day, can we just clear some things up, right? And I did that with a pretty peaceful energy. And you're like, yep, okay, let's talk. And then I just shared, and I was again responsibly sharing with I statements, hey, I'm feeling, and I want to keep it personal, what we were talking about, but I was like, hey, I was feeling this, and this is something that came up for me when, you had done this. And so I'm sharing myself, and you just held space. You just listened. You were looking at me. You weren't doing the things you mentioned, the eye rolling, the scoffing, the here we go again, or that doesn't make sense. You weren't interrupting. And so you're just listening, which allowed me to feel safe. And it also helps us down-regulate our feelings, right? Like in a sense, that's what co-regulation is. So self-regulation is your ability to regulate your own emotions. Co-regulation is when we're holding space for each other from that non-judgment and that safety. It's like our nervous systems can like relax a little bit. And so you listened, and then I will be honest, when it was your turn to go, I would give myself a C, a grade C on my holding space in that conversation.
Oh, it's funny. We don't usually do letters.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
that
yes.
was funny. Usually it's a score from 1 to 10, but yeah, okay, see.
So I definitely could have done better. It wasn't horrible, but it definitely could have been better in holding space for you. However, because we practiced so much about how to really keep things from escalating, it stayed very productive. We were hearing each other out, even though we had to like finesse some things and kind of work through things we're misunderstanding about each other to finally get to a place of where we both understood what we each needed moving forward. You know, we talk about course correcting. All right, I hear for you. I'm going to take that in because honestly, why I gave myself a C is because in that moment, because of the emotion I was feeling, it was hard for me to put myself in your shoes. And so I needed to just hear you and say, you know what? I'm going to give this some thought. Like I don't have an answer for you right now, or I just am going to hear what you said and I'm going to go give this some thought. And you know what? You'll see me implement it tomorrow.
So this just reminds me, so I don't mean to cut you off if you were going a different direction. Let's move to the common challenges because we've already given some examples of both the challenges and some of the practical tips. So we'll make this last section a little bit quicker. But what you just said reminded me of something that we didn't put down. But common challenges. Why is it a challenge to hold space, to listen, and to appropriately respond when your partner is sharing an emotion? From what you just said, it is because, well, number one, often we're trying to fix problems.
Yeah.
But I think we're trying to fix it. And again, I can only really speak for myself, but also the thousands of men that I've interacted with. It's uncomfortable. It going back to the role that we believe emotions are is that there's no room for it, and it's only emotions when there's an upset. So it's like immediately when a partner is sharing emotions, like, oh, there's an upset, there's a problem, there's a conflict. Okay, so then like the immediate thing for men is to start to think about, well, what's the fix or solution here so I can move past this uncomfortable conversation? And similarly, like I think with that is also then there's a fear of vulnerability and, as you wrote this down, emotional exposure. Now, I don't think very many people would say at the top of mind that that's a barrier, but right below that, why do I want to fix? Well, because this is uncomfortable. Why does this feel uncomfortable? Because there's vulnerability and I might have to expose myself. I may have to reveal a hurt, a pain, a shame, something I feel guilt about. And so a lot of that is, let's just move on past all that. And what we don't understand is if you could really hold space for each other and allow for these emotions, if you get through that properly, man, there's a lot of connection there and there's deeper understanding. And then you could even hear the perspective or view that your partner was coming from. And oftentimes, you know, even if I don't feel I had a lot to do with the upset, I almost always come away with, oh, I didn't even realize that you were seeing it that way, and it makes sense. So even if I didn't think there was a role for me there, so it really clears up miscommunications and prior assumptions that were there about why there was an upset or were you blaming me, all that stuff. And if you can really just get through that, there's like a perspective there that you didn't see, right?
Yeah.
Like the perspective that any of us have is what drives attitude and emotion, and the attitude and emotion, how we handle that drives our action. So if it's like if you're walking around wondering why your partner is acting the way they do, well, it's not just the emotion. It's actually, well, if I thought about the perspective they were coming from, it all ties together. It's like, oh, makes total sense.
I think those barriers are so spot on. One more I'll add is that I think we can have these underlying subconscious beliefs about what our partner's emotions mean about us. So what I mean by that is, for me, when I had lower self-esteem, when my partner was disappointed, upset with me, you know, any of the more quote unquote negative emotions, I was so fragile in a sense, right? It's like, oh, does that mean you don't love me as much, or, you know, you don't see me as in good of a light, right? My self-esteem was so fragile. And so as I became I had a better relationship with myself. I now can hear your feelings. And even if I'm struggling to put myself in your shoes at that time or see your perspective, because I feel like I'm on the other side of the experience, if I take some time to consider it, it's like, you know what? Two things can be true. You can have your experience and it can be valid, and mine can as well. And they don't have to counteract each other. They don't have to cancel each other out. And also, you having some frustration about me doesn't at all threaten your commitment to me or have you love me less. And I think that's so important that you guys create that environment in your marriage, is that even if you do experience the negative emotions towards each other, because that's a part of life, it doesn't at all rattle your commitment or your love for each other. It's like, I know you can be frustrated and still love me, So I also, I'll just add this and then we can continue with the next section, is we also have to remember that emotions are like so transient. You might feel so strong in that moment. Like I'm in the closet and I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so mad, or at least it feels like that in the moment. Like I'm so upset about this.
Location based, you were in our closet.
Yes, I was literally in our closet.
Why is she in a closet?
No, I said, remember, I'm unpacking. You were downstairs doing some stuff, and so I'm like, in that moment, it feels so intense. It feels so real, but then it truly, if I just take a few minutes, whether to myself or once we talk through it calmly, it dissipates. And so you have to remember too that like you don't want to grab onto emotions and get caught up in them and always think that they're definitely real and they're valid. However, when you really can communicate beneath the surface, like the initial anger you might be feeling might be actually just masking vulnerability, or an insecurity or something that was having you not feel loved, for example. So there's kind of like the presenting emotion, and then there's the vulnerability beneath it. That's the thing you want to communicate about.
Last two things, actually. As much as you feel that emotion in the moment and that, this is going to last for so long and it's so real to me, I think what you're getting to is also that it's often very short-lived. And if you can hold this space, if you can listen, if you can respond in a way that's supportive and loving and leads to understanding, like you said, that emotion, not only does it kind of like go away, it gets replaced by whatever feeling you get when you feel understood, right? Which is usually quite positive. Last thing I'll say about a barrier that I just thought of too, a big barrier is that when your partner is sharing an upset or an emotion, that you also have one. And then so you throw that on top, right? So now it's a battle of upsets or unmet needs or lack of understood emotions. So that's another big barrier I see. So I won't belabor that point. But as we close this out here, I know we've sprinkled some of the practical tips in, but let's go through some of the specific tools you can implement. Yep. Active listening, as simple as it seems, is a huge tool for this.
And it takes intentionality and focus.
And we won't describe this too much. It's really just actually saying out loud, like, hey, you know what? It seems like we're missing something here. I know we both have something to share, but let's do active listening. So it seems like you're already going first, or maybe it seems more important to you. Why don't you be the speaker? I'll be the listener. More to it, but generally speaking, you get the sense the listener mirrors back to the point in which the speaker can say, yes, I feel understood.
And to that point that you made a minute ago, when your partner is sharing, so you're the active listener, you just temporarily put your thing to the side, right? And you try to put yourself in their shoes and like truly be focused as if you were, this is what I do sometimes. Like, I think I'm your friend listening to you talk about someone different.
Oh, really?
So it's like, let me just listen to you as if this isn't even about me, so I can actually just empathize with your experience. And I've put my thing to the side. And then when it's my turn, I can grab that thing from the side, and now it's my turn to share mine.
Which really leads to the second point then is, if you're going to do that, then you also want to avoid interrupting your partner.
Yes.
So that naturally happens if you designate the speaker-listener roles. And just like what you said, if you set aside, or like sometimes I say, you shelf your own upset, it's like, the main thing here is you're not going to be interrupting what they're saying. Now, for some people, maybe you need to set a time limit. I just want to put that out there. You obviously can't talk for like an hour. I mean, attention spans are not even that long, and there's a difference between men and women with attention spans also. So something to be cognizant of, but essentially you just, all right, there's going to be a period of time in which you're not going to interrupt your partner.
Yes. Also, ask open-ended or clarifying questions. So rather than like trying to correct what they're saying or defend yourself, just ask a clarifying question. Hey, can you share more about what you mean by blank? Or, hey, it sounded like you were really upset or affected by this thing that you said. Can you share more about that? So that you don't jump to conclusions or misunderstand them, misinterpret them. Then just focus on validating their emotion or empathizing with it or just putting yourself in their shoes. And sometimes it just helps to actually label the feeling. So you can literally just say, like, I definitely hear you, that upset you, or I definitely understand that made you feel unloved when I did blank. Like, just label it. Sometimes that's literally it. That's all you sometimes need to say. Of course, there's other times where there's more for you to follow up on or, give them assurance or anything like that. But sometimes it's literally just helping them feel like you mirrored it back and you labeled it and you're just like, I get it. Or thank you for sharing that with me. I definitely will be considerate of that in the future. I'll be mindful. Sometimes that's it. And see, like, they might be like, okay, thanks. Or maybe not. Maybe there's more that they need to hear from you and you can clarify that.
Mm-hmm. So then lastly, seems obvious to say, but you have to be present. You have to not be on your phone, not be looking elsewhere, give your attention to your partner, not be thinking about what your response should be, but you just really have your attention, your energy, your body even directed towards them. All these things make subtle differences. Simply put, you have to be present with them.
So just as I summarize some of these points, remember too that the length of time that you're having these moments of holding space is going to vary in different situations. So there's times where even on the trip, you were maybe a little bit frustrated by something not even related to me, right? Like whether it was how something happened in transit, and me holding space looked like just being like, yeah, I hear you. That was frustrating, right? So sometimes it's a 5-second thing, a 30-second thing. Other times it's what happened when we came back, where we needed to have a little bit more of a back and forth and sharing more of our feelings because it was related to each other. The key is that in these different scenarios, you just are receptive to each other. You, to Erin's point, think of emotions as a range of experience that you want to have in life together. And that's what contributes to you feeling connected, to feeling there's a sense of deep intimacy in your relationship, that you two are rock solid. You can overcome and get through anything together. Because what we all really want to feel is that it's safe to feel in the relationship. It's okay. It's received. And to be able to communicate through it rather than it have to become a fight. That's what's frustrating, is when I express my feelings, it now becomes a fight. So we hope you really focus on implementing these. We, after sessions, have many of you reach out to do private sessions. Unfortunately, but also we're grateful, we have such a long wait list for private sessions. That is truly why we created our 2 30-day couples challenges. We have 2 of them. We have a level 1 and a level 2. The level 1 is called Prioritizing Us and focuses on filling your love accounts and strengthening your communication, little ways to connect every day. The level 2, Rebuilding Us, is going deeper into topics around emotional intelligence, mastering the art of apologies, understanding the real, bigger needs in your marriage. Many couples, I'd say most couples, like to do both. You can do the level 2 before you do level 1. There's no wrong way to do it, but we highly recommend that you do whichever challenge you have not done. So you can actually see both of those and get signed up for the next round at meetthefreemans.com/links. You can read countless testimonials. You'll see why I think we're at 36,000 couples who have done our challenges now, and the testimonials just constantly blow our minds for both of them. So go and check out that level 1, Prioritizing Us. and the level 2 Rebuilding Us challenge and get signed up for the next round. We'll link that in the show notes as well. But we hope that this episode was helpful. It's so important. And if you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can hear past and future episodes. And if you take away value, it would mean so much to us if you'd give us a rating on whichever platform you're listening on. But we are grateful for you guys, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.